Hey everyone, welcome back to Make It Happen Mondays, where we talk about sales, business, entrepreneurship, personal growth, mental health, and everything in between with guests who I truly respect and I think make a positive impact on the world around us. And this is a fun one. This is my good friend, Ryan Williams. Now, Ryan's a longtime friend. I've trained a couple of clients he's been at a few times, and also he's a certified executive coach and now CEO of ANTEATER Media, where he helps founders build revenue pipeline through short-form video content. He built a $58 million sales team at AdRoll, coached over 400 startup CEOs, and seen the 0 to 100 million journey with 3 SaaS companies. So he is just filled with knowledge, far more than I have, quite frankly. And it was funny because usually we do a little bit of an intro and I'm like, all right, look, we're going to get going here. And I kick things off. I'm like, hey, Ryan, what's up? To intro the podcast. This one, though, we just started talking and I was like, oh, I need to record this. And I hit record. And so you're just going to jump right into the middle of the conversation. There's no setup on this one, but we went all over the place. We talked about sales and where people are right now and what reps need to do to build trust, how to really instill confidence as a leader in your organization. Talked about transparency and the level of transparency, and just a really good holistic conversation about sales and where things are going and what we need to do to be successful, and some gems along the way. He's got some great book recommendations and tips that he has out there as well. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Let's make it happen.
What's a win for you with your podcast?
Just a good conversation, man. That's it.
Yes, cool.
Yeah, it's everybody loves the authenticity, the no bullshit, anything tactical. But these days, I'm telling sales reps that we don't have any option anymore to be average. Like, you have to level the fuck up across the board. And business acumen is one of the, I'm telling people, like, I don't care, forget about your sales skills and all that other stuff. Like, you'll get better at that. But if you can learn how to have a business conversation about what happened, so you can have empathy for the people that you're reaching out to, you have a chance. Because the one thing that AI can't do is fundamentally, it can't give a shit. Like, it can pretend to give a shit, but it can't genuinely give a shit. And I think honestly,
it can't connect.
I think when we talk about like sales reps and why they hate sales reps is because most of them go through the fucking motions. And they're useless. And quite frankly, they bring zero value to the equation in any way, shape, or form. But if you can have a conversation with me, like, first of all, A, normal, don't bring me through a fucking process. And B, maybe you don't have to bring insights, but you have to be curious enough to potentially get me to think. I think Beck Holland said something that really got me, that hit me, which is, executives specifically, they don't want to be asked, like, for you to qualify an executive, I don't need to know what my fucking problems are. I know what my problems are. So you going through this process to find out what my problems are, what I don't know are where my blind spots are. What I don't know is what maybe the root cause of this problem is, because I'm surface level. It's like, oh, I need top of funnel, whatever it is. So I need training. It's like, do you, or do you need deliverability? Do you have the right people? So I think it's that, like being curious enough to have a conversation and dig is what I'm looking for, versus anybody can bring me through a fucking bant questions and drone through demos here, which I can't stand. So,
yeah, I think that's an interesting starting point in terms of like what the sales rep can actually do, is because many people, so empathy and caring is one set of skills, but there's also this like a bit of curiosity, where if you attach curiosity to a lens focused back on yourself. Let's say you're 22-year-old sales rep out there, box of DeWalt tools in the back of your truck, trying to figure out what's next and who's going to close next. If you start with a curiosity of what do I have to offer, right? So I used to tell reps on my team, they'd come to me and they'd say, everybody seems to get promoted off your team. What gives? At AdRoll, I was running a $58 million sales team. And at one point I looked back at it all, and of our like 12 or 13 mid-market sales reps or sales leaders, they were all carrying about a $16 million bag. 10 or 11 of them came off my team. There's maybe 12 of them at the time. Maybe one didn't come from my team. And everybody kept asking me, like, why is this? Why is this? Why is this? I found out later that it was a little more complicated than just this one piece of advice. But when somebody said, hey, I want to go get promoted as a sales rep, I would say, start with your boss's OKRs. We had a great VP of sales, later a CRO, who would stand up and give us in the company update. This is what I want to do for the next 90 days. what sales rep writes that down and says, I'm going to go get involved in that problem, right? Because that's somebody who's curious, who's actually saying, what can I give to this executive problem? Whether that's an internal example. The external example is too, it's not as easy as like, hey, I subscribe to this thing or ask ChatGPT what you're worried about, what keeps you up at night. And now I'm going to go try to connect with you about it. Like sometimes that works, but if you can do it at home, right? If you can do that at, start at home. Like what does your roommate care about? How do you connect with them? Right? What is a big day? So like when I was in my early 20s, my roommate and I had very little in common. We went to the same college. We bumped into each other on the streets of Chicago trying to find an apartment. Literally, like we're out on the street. I'm going door to door trying to find something out of the back before we had, phones that would tell us everything. I'm there with the Chicago Reader trying to find an apartment. So when I bump into Nate, and we had very different lives, very different companies, the things that were important to me were not the things that were important to him. And once we figured out how to be curious about each other, it was a lot more fun to live together, first of all. But that same skill can come with you to work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What do your peers care about? What does your boss care about? And then you go, okay, well, how can I be helpful? Right.
It's
and so, in the AdRoll story, like, Suresh lays out his plan. He goes, hey, we need to open an office in Europe. You didn't know between London or Dublin at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'd have reps ask me like, hey, what can I do to get noticed? Well, we don't have territories. Who have you called in London lately? Who are you calling in Europe? This is pre-GDPR, right? So AdRoll was able to sell that territory pretty good. And the reps who said, I'm going to take my vertical knowledge and go call this list, those are the ones that would kill it and get noticed and come up the management meetings. It was actually that simple, right? Can the same thing be true in the industry? I think probably.
I agree with that. Absolutely. And I sum that up as a give a shit factor. Like, do you care? Right? It's do you care mm-hmm. enough to look mm-hmm. to that next level, to look to that person from an empathetic standpoint to see, what does a day in a life look like of a CTO? Like, what do they get asked on a day-to-day basis? Forget about what the pitch says and all these other things. Like, let me think of them as a person and how can I do help? And that's actually, I'm telling a lot of reps right now, like, stop thinking about sales, become problem solvers, period. Just become a fucking problem solver. And surround yourself almost with like, pick your, whoever your ICP is. This is what I used to do when I was a kid in sales was I would then go find all the vendors that were associated and supported that client, right? So whether they were existing vendors or new ones. And I would then just call up the top rep in whatever that vendor was. And I'd be like, hey, can you and I like meet once a month just to talk about, you looks like you go after the same type of clients I do, that type of thing. When I find opportunities, I'll bring you in. And if you find any opportunities here, would you bring me in? And I would just develop like 10 relationships where I would just every month talk to them and be like, hey, what's up? And then when I was sitting there working with a client, I'd be like diagnosing whatever their problem was. And I'd be like, actually, this isn't something I can help with, but you know what? You should bring in so-and-so, you should talk to whatever, right? That type of thing. And even just that recommendation of like, hey, I could probably help you out here, but it's not going to be perfect. I know somebody else who's better at it than I am. So let me introduce you to them. And then once that's settled, maybe we can do some business together and I can help. Just that alone brings your credibility through the roof. And then they actually start paying attention and listening to you. So
I saw that one time in real time. I think it was an accident, but I should give credit where credit is due. Like the AdRoll marketing team did a great job, but I was sent to a conference in Chicago. We got there. At the booth was a stack of small folios, passport size, like 10-page little booklets like you might get taking your kid to the zoo or whatever. And there was a whole stack of these, and that was basically 8 problems that were being solved at the conference. And page 1 was an attribution thing. Page 2 was like a back-end e-commerce thing, and there were a bunch of different things on there. And what we were basically invited to do is anybody who came to the booth who had one of these other problems, give them the passport and send them off on their way. And what that did was it increased our traffic flow from all these other booths where they said, oh, well, after you figure out the thing we solve, then you need to figure out how to advertise. And so you can scale that up. And that it worked like a champ. And then later on, as my career progressed, I discovered exactly why that is. And that's something about the way trustworthiness works, which is, was on my list to talk about because you've seen a lot of sales reps that you trust, and I'm sure you've met a lot that you don't. I think it comes down to a pretty simple way to look at it. But in this case, if you're willing to send somebody a solution to their problem that you don't benefit from, that is such low self-orientation. No, yes, give a shit factor is high. In it for me factor is low.
Low. Yep.
That's what changes the game.
And I think when it's genuine, right? I think a lot of people do things with the idea that eventually they're going to come back and try to cash in on whatever that was. But I think if you genuinely go about it as I'm just trying to help, and whatever it is, what it is, if it comes back around, it comes back around. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm a big believer in karma and all that shit anyways. So,
yeah,
it might not come back in the short term, but definitely in the long term. And that's how I've lived my entire career, basically. So
I was thinking about uncomfortable questions because when I had to look back up to see who it was because I didn't know him, but you did an episode, I think, with Andres, was it Laris?
Yeah.
About negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't recognize him as somebody that I'd crossed paths with before, but you were talking about like you had said to him something about how like reps that can like ask, like the biggest problem was people not asking for the whole deal, like selling themselves short, shooting themselves in the foot. And I forget what the whole story was, but what I thought was a real takeaway for me is like, we have to be ready to have mature conversations, right? You're talking about having business curiosity and having like an acumen to have a real conversation. And that example where budget's concerned, actually solving the problem and having a sense of it. A few years ago, I was in as a leadership coach for a CEO that had 3 people on a sales team. He was about to raise Series B. Company was doing great, backed by Excel, backed by Y Combinator, taking off. But he didn't have a sales leader. So he asked me to step in and like do some leadership coaching. And I had one of the people on the team had to go on a trip to a conference. And they had said, this will never get approved because it's so expensive. It was an overseas thing. It was last minute. I had actually suggested taking a flight that wasn't going to leave them exhausted, and spend a little more money, upgrade the ticket, et cetera. And the pushback I got from the rep was like, this is never going to fly. I said, okay, bring it to the sales meeting, get to the sales meeting. And it's my turn to go. And I said, hey, CEO, called him out. And I said, what is this conference and this lead worth to you? And he said like, I don't know, $250K. And the sales rep shit themselves because they just weren't ready for that answer. Like there's a world where the thing that you're doing is worth more than my mom's house. It's all relative, and I don't mean to make light of that because, you're not, that's not for a Yelp ad subscription, by the way, at $400 a month. That, and no offense to the, velocity selling and VSMB and SMB, like, yeah, go get it, but it's a different motion. In this case, it was go see this client. I don't care if it costs, and this was like a $15,000, experience. I was like, oh, well, that's a no brainer then. If it's a 10x ROI just for me to get on the ground, my boss wants it that bad, but there's a maturity, there's a business maturity to being able to say, this is what it costs us. This is what we're going to have back. Whether you're proposing budget or you're going internal to like justify or explain a business case, you got to have a mature conversation or being willing to go there.
And I think you have to, look, a lot of this comes with experience and stuff like that, but it also comes, I think, from a leadership standpoint, putting the reps in a position to have those conversations. You know what I mean? Like giving them the background of why they should be asking these stuff and what things certain cost and the value of those things. Because that's what we've skipped, right? My whole pitch these days, as far as, the golden age of sales between 2010 and 2022, like we've over-engineered the sales process and we forgot all about business fundamentals and that type of shit. And now these kids can't even have a conversation because, it's hard. And so getting back to, just letting the reps listen to a conversation like this, you know what I mean? Having your executive team come in once a month, once a week, once a month to talk to the team about what it means when a company goes through a merger and acquisition. How do people really look at P&Ls? What does a CFO look at from a budgetary standpoint? Like when was the last time any client who's listening to this potentially right now had their CFO come in and say, hey, I just want to let you guys know, like I know you all call CFOs and you try to do this ROI bullshit. None of that works because this is how I look at investments. Like 80% of what we invest in throughout the year is not something we have budgeted, right? It doesn't happen.
This happened to me, a few years ago. I was headed out to dinner with a couple friends, the guys that I know from summer camp. right? Like these aren't people that I casually know or even went to college with. Like we used to shower together when we were 10, right? So I can ask him anything.
Yeah.
And one fella is one of my buddies was a CFO of a $3 billion company that was owned by a private equity backed firm. And so he had been around the venture space. He had a couple IPOs already. He was at this company, and his friend from summer camp is like fucking around on his whiteboard. He's like, dude, stop it. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like I'm ready to go. I don't give a shit what his job is. I'm playing with the Legos. I'm writing stuff on the whiteboard. He's like, dude, stop it. I need to get out of here. I shouldn't have even signed you in to come up here, right? And so somewhere in all this, I said, hey, just curious. You're the CFO of a company that's worth $3 billion. You've got, they're well crossed the $100 million threshold. I said, what do you care about? And he said, don't tell anybody except for the John Barrows podcast. He said, don't tell anybody. But if I tell everybody on the floor that I need to read anything over 50K, but I really can't get to it unless it's 100K and above. I have somebody on my team who knows how to read it for me between 50 and 100. And then there are some leaders who do this. And when he said that, I thought it was so interesting because it wasn't just the kind of corporate shield, like acknowledgement of like, hey, I can't do it all. So here's what I do. That's one piece of the story. That's the only thing you get enough of the story. But there's actually a bigger piece here, which is, what do I have time to care about? And what are the types of things that are big enough where there's 2 signature lines or 3? Biggest deal I ever did, or hardest one, it's actually not the biggest deal, but the hardest deal I ever did, had 4 signature lines that had to be done by the end of the year. And I'll tell you what, these 4 people don't travel together with their kids. They're all going different directions for the holidays, right? So, and it was a giant pain to get that done, Thankfully, it worked out, but I went back to that conversation with my friend about the stuff he actually cares about. This is high enough for my neck to be on the line. This is high enough where I'm pinning it to somebody else. He didn't say it like that, but he was talking about internal responsibilities. He was talking about who on the team he could trust. New CFO, everybody's like, oh, you got a new CFO? That's the time to bomb in with like, show them how great you are at sales. It's like, new CFO doesn't have their sidekick lieutenant who reads their stuff. That person's trying to read everything for the first 90 days because they're trying to figure out if the business is the right size. That's no time for this fancy sales stuff and the garbage of like,
unless you know them. So that what I find is like everybody talks about triggers, like don't you dare, if somebody starts a new company, jump on that and be like, hey, if they've never talked to you before, let's talk. But if you've worked with them in the past, that's exactly when you should reach out to be like, yo, Ryan, what's up, man? I know you're just getting the dust settled. Let me know if you want me to come in and teach the team to give you some breathing room so that we can do some outbound here in the short term, right? Then it's like, yes, please, John, because I know you. I know what you bring to the table, that type of stuff. I can trust you, to your point, and I can use this to buy, because no executive is going to make a decision on some brand new software as the first decision that they've ever made in an organization. It's just not going to happen. So,
yeah, I think there are a couple of times where you might have somebody who's like coming in and like, so one thing I when I was doing more advisory and more coaching of founders, I would tell people to look at job descriptions that are or job postings. If you're looking at a fintech company that has a VP of compliance job posted, that is a giant billboard that says they are breaking the law and the board knows about it, right? Think about that. Like somebody had to approve that job description. It's VP of compliance. I want you to make sure you do X and Y and Z so we don't get sued. Well, that is a big billboard that says we are actually breaking law right now, or we are about to. Hurry the fuck up, right? So think about that when you're prospecting in. It's like, oh, I saw you've got a VP of compliance listed. Maybe it's time to talk about X and Y. It's like, they're in an urgent situation and there are ways you could potentially help. If you're not helping, you maybe should get out of the way and wait a few months for the dust to settle for that role to be in place, right? But I want to go back and disagree with you just a little bit, just a touch. The idea about, everybody that, when you're going out there and saying, I need to make sure I'm 100% totally give value without expecting anything in return. I think it's also okay that we merge that advice with the idea of having a mature business conversation. If you emailed a CRO friend and you said, hey, I know you're there, you're in a new spot, pro bono training, let me give you some breathing room. I'll get everybody on the same page. In my case, you came in to Checkmate to help us do negotiation and prospecting. And you jumped in at a time when we're like, look, we can't do it all as sales leaders. John's going to come in, trusted, somebody we trust, content we trust, stuff we've seen already. Come in and do this. And that's one day of us breathing easy. The kids have heard it from a second adult, right? Which is, as you know, as a parent, like sometimes they do this. But it's also okay to offer that and say, I'm doing this and here's what I'm getting out of it. Let me call this out and say, hey, the thing that I'm getting out of this is like, I want to be on your list. I want to be on track to be a vendor of record because I haven't worked with X before. You probably don't have very many of those that you haven't worked with, but I want to be in your system. I don't care if you only pay me $1. I want to help you out first and foremost. I also want to be in your system for when things get interesting. You're going to have to evaluate sales ops. You're going to have to evaluate training. And I just want to be in the conversation so somebody else in the org knows my value so you don't have to vouch for me later.
Yeah. And I think the difference for me is the explicit or implicit intent, in the sense that, yes, I agree with you on that one, in the sense like, hey, Ryan, I'm happy to help you out right now here. Look, when the times get right, man, like, can we talk about doing some other stuff? Like, I think it's the people that to me, that there's an ulterior motive for why they're doing it and they're not expressing it. I'm fine with the people that express it and be like, yeah, no, I am doing, and look, the negotiations on my end is always give to get, in the sense that it's like, I'm happy to give that to you, and the reciprocity versus quid pro quo. And in order for me to give you exactly what you need, this is what I need in return from you, right? So there is some equality there. But I find that there is a disingenuous group out there that does things, and then all of a sudden later on, it's like you feel like you owe them, even though you didn't ask for what they did. And it's like, I didn't ask for that, so I appreciate it.
There are actually trainers teaching to do that, make people feel on the hook, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the whole give a flower at the airport thing?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's reciprocity. And again, that's the difference between manipulation versus influence, right? Like, when you know for a fact the reciprocity and you're using kind of influence to manipulate situations, because, oh, take the flower. And it's like, oh, I don't want the flower, but now that I took it, I feel obligated to have this fucking conversation.
Yeah.
Like, that's the negative intent behind it. The real intent is to get you exactly what you're looking for. And I think there's a fine line of it, but you're right.
Yeah.
So,
actually, how many times have you heard somebody in sales talk about becoming the client's trusted advisor?
All day, every day.
Right.
Yeah,
everybody always says it, but how many reps and leaders do you know who've actually read the book called Trusted Advisor?
Zero.
Fucking zero. Right. Yeah. So, I wanted to share this with you because when it came into my life, it was like light bulbs went on. And okay. I think it might be interesting for both reps and leaders to have a look. You don't have to read this whole book. So don't salespeople who are busy getting their windshield time in, don't worry, you don't have to buy this on Audible. But there's a book actually called The Trusted Advisor, and it comes from David Meister and his team. And what they did is they researched how someone buys legal services. Okay. So you're going out and you're trying to buy a lawyer, or buy a lawyer's time rather, right? You're trying to go hire a lawyer. And so these guys went and did some research and realized that there's a very simple mathematical equation to how someone evaluates the trustworthiness of their future attorney. And it's 4 elements. We've already talked about the most important element on this show already, which is self-orientation. But we're going to come back to that. So element number 1 is credibility. Credibility is, what do you know? Element number 2, reliability. What do you do? Element number 3 is intimacy, which intimacy is a weird business word, but think about psychological safety. Do you feel safe around this person? Okay. And take those 3 letters and then add them together and then divide them by self-orientation. So I'll give you an example, right? So if you're going to go buy a car, everybody knows a used car salesman is the most sleazy out there, right? That's what gives us the bad rap. I think there's more than that gives us a bad rap in sales, but start there because everybody knows the analogy. When that person shows you what they know because they know the market and they know what your car is worth, or they're able to be helpful, sales rep can be one of the most helpful people. When that person continuously shows up, they say, I'm going to send you offers when I see them, and you never hear from them again. Yep, I knew you weren't reliable. When you trust them with your email or your phone number, and they do text you things that are, hey John, I didn't see anything this week that met your criteria, but I wanted to let you know I'm doing my end of week reporting. I'm just telling you, report out. I didn't see anything, but I'm looking. Okay, that's really helpful, especially if you're shopping for something unique. Intimacy. Why is it that you really want to go get a Subaru Brat, right? Or whatever it is you're searching for. Like being able to like confide in your weird buying habit or whatever it is. How does somebody make you feel? There's a great Zig Ziglar story from a car lot where there's one rep who comes up and says, "Oh man, what a beater. Can't wait to get you into something new." And Zig's guy goes up and says, "John, that was a great car. The 76 Buick I just made something up because I'm not a car guy, but 76 Buick was a great car when they came out. It served you well. It looks like you raised the kids in that car, as opposed to like your seats are torn up," and actually just connects with you and just says, instead of making you feel bad, like how many times have you gone on with a vendor who makes you feel dog shit about your last decision? "Oh, you use HubSpot. You haven't upgraded to Salesforce yet. Fuck you, man. Oh, you're a sales off guy instead of outreach. I could give a shit about sales tools now. I used to care. I used to care a lot, but I don't care now. Cause now I know basic elements, right? So credibility, what you know, reliability, what you do, intimacy, how you make people feel. And then why are you doing it? So go back to the car lot. Guy approaches you and says, "Look, I want to talk to you about your car." And you go, No, I'm not ready to talk. I just want to walk around. I just want to see what you have. Like, step back, Jimmy. And what if Jimmy said instead, "I know looking for a car can be tough to figure out who you want to talk with. I'm over here when you're ready. And just to let you know, we don't have commissions on Fridays," or whatever. I just made that up. But what if there is something where it's like, "Just wanted to let you know the way this is set up, I'm just here to answer questions," or, "I only get paid when you're happy," or whatever it is. And the car lot might break down when we talk about self-orientation because we know this person's on commission. But can that person demonstrate that the commission is not as valuable as the relationship?
And I think that, in transactional like cars, that's why it fails, right? Because they don't look at, okay, well, that's on a 4-year lease, so that guy's never going to come back, whatever it is.
It's the biggest transaction you'll have without a personal relationship. Whereas why doesn't it happen in your real estate agent? She lives in the neighborhood. Right. You've known her from somebody else. You got introduced by somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Trust is a hard thing right now. I think that's why people say they buy from people they like, and I disagree. I think they buy from people they trust. I don't necessarily need to like you, but I need to trust what you're saying to me is real, is true. And, I think right now, because we are so transaction oriented and, because we've just abused the process over the past 10 years, the trust factor is like worse than it ever has been.
I don't trust you with my email anymore.
No.
I don't trust you with my phone number.
Right.
You're probably going to text me even when I opt out.
Exactly. And so the question is like, how do you build trust in a short? I actually just had Ted McKenna from Jolt Effect this morning. I had him on the podcast, and they talk about how sales reps need to become problem solvers and all this other stuff about really making sure they are not necessarily the detailed expert in the product, but know enough to not just be like, "Sorry, I don't know." But on the flip side, they talked about how building trust, admitting you don't know is actually a way of building trust. Like admitting a certain component of your solution isn't the best, but this is where we shine, or, "Hey, I don't know that, I'll get back to you." So I asked him, like, what's the line of expertise, if you will, these days that gives you enough credibility to have the conversation and have somebody to trust you, but also you don't need to be that full-blown solutions engineer who knows everything about it. So what's your perspective on that? Like how much of, and we could talk about the predictable revenue model and how it's all falling apart in front of our face right now. But if we just look at the sales rep, right, like call it an AE at the end of the day, where do you think the line is now of how much they need to know about the product, the solution, that type of thing, and how deep they need to go versus, using a solutions engineer and that type of thing to be able to build that trust and carry that conversation?
I think the easiest shortcut or hack to that is to think about who does your client want to talk to, right? So if your client needs to talk to somebody who is at expert level, then you might actually go to a model that looks more like the famous Atlassian not having salespeople. They didn't not have salespeople. They had a process where every engineer was responsible to answer the phone. That's not when you're not trying to like write an article about it that has clickbait in it, that actually sounds pretty responsible when you're selling something that's very technical. When it's, let me tell you why Atlassian hates sales, then of course I'm going to click it. Of course I'm going to get angry, but they're not the only people getting paid for angry eyeballs these days. If you've been on CNN or Fox or whatever your pleasure is, right? That's another conversation. But in terms of the level of expertise, let's be honest with ourselves about who this customer wants to talk to. And so if you are selling something that requires configuration, requires a technical degree to use, costs the same as a full-time employee, then I think you got to be honest with yourself as an AE that you are an appointment setter. And if you don't like being an appointment setter, then be a facilitator. If you don't like being a facilitator, then think about yourself as a deal midwife. I don't care what works for you, but your job is to make sure the process goes smooth and nobody gets hurt and everybody has the best possible outcome. And if you introduce yourself that way and say, look, the thing that you're buying is very technical, so I'm going to help get you set on the right foot. And then you just say, I just need to qualify you with a couple of questions, budget, authority, need, and timeline. You're good. I'm just kidding. But, if instead of qualifying, you think about it as like, let's go connect and see how I can be helpful. One thing I could know as a rep without having to get technical is I could know how everybody else buys this. I could have an industry insight that I could lead with and say, you know what? Most people, it takes them 6 months to buy this. You just told me that you didn't want to talk to me because you're in a hurry. Is a hurry 6 months? That's a close-ended question. Open-ended question of the same thing is, what does being in a hurry mean to you? Excuse me. Another version could be scale of 1 to 10. How important is it that you have this done by the end of July? It's a 9. Oh, so it's really important to you. I'm looking at your website now. Looks like Joe is your CEO. How important is it to Joe? Oh, it's a 5 to Joe. Okay, so you don't have internal alignment yet. Now, I'm not going to ask that on our first date, right? So first phone call with somebody, I'm not going to say it quite like that. But that dramatic example is one to maybe cue off of and think about that as a rep. If you're not curious about, you asked this question, but we came full circle to where we started. If you're not curious enough about your own value and offering, I think that's why sales is so damn hard, is because it touches on confidence, touches on value and worth for us as individuals. It touches on to, some and people who had, have had touches with issues of confidence or with, demonstrating value from their systems they grew up in or schools they've been a part of or other companies they were at. Like, we all carry our life experiences with us. So when you think, oh, why would they ever want to talk to me? Well, think about it this way. Most sales reps can become an expert in way less than 10,000 hours, right? I think if you're a sales rep, you can become an expert in the deal process in about half of the time of the sales cycle. So let's say I'm selling you a 6-month piece of cloud software. Let's say it's cost $100,000 and it takes 6 months to buy. In 3 months, even the most junior AE, I have probably done more conversations about implementation and how to buy something or, discovery. And maybe it's not implementation. Depends on your process, right? It could be, how to qualify that the product's right for you. I will have been part of more of those conversations with the CTO than the times that CTO will have to go through it in their career. CTO has 20 jobs. Let's just say they work in Silicon Valley companies like us. So they go really fast. So they got 20 jobs in the course of their career. They probably are doing this part 6 times. Half of those jobs, they need to find a new cloud host. Well, let's say they're buying AWS. Half the times they're doing that. Okay. So can I talk to 6 people and be able to share industry insights within 3 months? I should be able to, and be able to offer that. So I don't know. That's kind of a blurry answer to your question, but I think you can become an expert in the stuff that you're supposed to be an expert in very quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's where, you could even become an expert. I was working with Outreach last week and doing their training, and I kept telling the reps, like, who here worked at a company before, that was in sales before coming here to Outreach, came from college, right?
What was the breakdown?
It was like 75% had already worked at a previous company.
They were somewhere else before.
Yeah, they were somewhere else. And I'm like, did you have outreach before you worked here? Like 90% of them didn't. I'm like, are you that much more effective now using outreach to do your job? Like, just think of yourself as a sales rep and your ability to execute and fill your pipeline. How much better is it now using outreach than it was using whatever you were before? Everybody's like, yeah, it's so much better. I go, then tell that fucking story. Because if you're reaching out to a VP of sales, like most of you are brand new, most of you don't have like, all the nuances of the product, but you're calling into VPs of sales who have a bunch of people just like you, who are just as inefficient as you were before your previous job. Call them up and tell that story. Be like, yo, I don't know what you're doing, but I was at a company before that wasn't using this. Now I'm over here and here's my workflow. Here's how much more efficient I am. I know your reps are probably dealing with some of the same challenges. I would love to show you that transition for me. Like, that's such a natural, easy story to tell.
Yeah. And, the people who are killing it with that specific story are what I see are the reps who are also not afraid to put that online. They go to marketing and they say, look at my stats. The A reps aren't worried about somebody looking over their shoulder and using them as an internal case study. And outreach is a great example. We don't always have that clear of an example, but here's the homework that I would give to somebody who's thinking about using media to bring more inbound leads. And they're just slightly suspicious, thinking maybe short form YouTube, maybe LinkedIn videos. We're seeing a lot more LinkedIn video lately. Somebody who's thinking about that, who just had the prompt that you gave them, tell the story about before you had outreach. I would want them to actually think about what are 4 or 5 things that were true about your life and sales, and have outreach only be one of those things. Because that VP of sales who's our age is a long way away from being, because frankly, like John, even I know you prospect for your own business, but it's not the same because you're carrying 20 years of history.
I'm not making
inside the world's best companies.
Yeah.
So you can't actually go back to that old John. Like, as much as you want to give your younger self advice, you can't picture that world. But if somebody came to you and said, hey, John, here's what your reps are going through, because here's what I went through recently. We're really distracted because you asked us to use this thing that's on our phone, but all my notifications are on. So every time I get my phone out, I'm seeing a snap from my girlfriend, or I'm seeing a thing from my college buddies, or I'm on Instagram, and like Instagram has sent me a thing of like, oh, you didn't respond to this post at this time. And so now I find myself losing big blocks of time. Well, that's something I didn't have to go to back in my, I never did 1,000 dials, but I did a freaking lot of them. But in those days, I didn't have that distraction. So that sales rep now can understand expertise in teaching people that have our level of experience. Hey, this is what it's like right now for us. Yeah, I know you're cool, John. You got Snap, and I know you're cool. You got Instagram, but you're using it very differently because all my friends, we're not texting each other. We're DMing.
Yep.
Is that true for your family? My mom sent me that message on Facebook, but awkward. I'm not keeping, like, my mom's got 3 messages in my Facebook queue right now. I'm like, I just don't have time. Yeah. I love you, Mom, if you're listening, but like, I don't have time for the meme stuff. The memeable stuff. I somehow make time when it's my friends, or it's text that I'm getting from Lars with you and Doug on the I can reply to those. But when I'm getting Facebook messages from my mom, I'm not doing that right now. So anyway, my point is, if the rep or whoever is thinking, okay, it's time to build trust. Well, I'm going to build trust from my experience by sharing what I know. I know what it's like to be at this station in life, to be 24 years old, to be selling for the second or third time. I know a lot more than my VP of sales does about how hard it is on the street right now. If I use that to complain at the sales meeting or to ask for more money, I start to lose trust. But if I use that to teach my clients, let's say you're outreach and you're sales, selling to sales, and I'm going to teach my clients what's it like right now, that's really interesting. If I'm open about outreach's shortcomings, because I love Manny, but I'm sure the product has issues, like every product has issues. If I'm open and honest about it, and saying, hey, here's the workaround that I use with Google Docs or whatever they're doing these days, then boom, that credibility has shot up because I just showed you low self-orientation and I taught you something, which is credibility, what you know. And so now that trustworthiness factor goes up. So if you're thinking about doing short form media, tell the whole story. Tell your experience, tell what it's like using the product, tell people what you would do if you use the product, like, because everybody's had a rep who doesn't know, say, look, here's what's true about the business. Like, dude, calm down. Look at the whole picture. Like, I've been buying this stuff for years. You're new to it. Tell me something that's novel that you see being new to it.
That's it's interesting because I think, so many companies are still afraid to let their reps post on social about stuff that isn't like company approved.
Yeah.
And it's almost like if you allowed every person that came on board at your company to post and share about their onboarding journey and what they're learning, right? So it's like, hey, today I came out of boot camp and I just realized like outreach can do this, and holy shit, it blew my mind because I'd never been check this out, right? And that type of thing, like the amount of PR and trust you would build by allowing like first line people who have never used this shit before to then share what they're learning about the product and the onboarding. It's literally like marketing in a box, and you don't even have to try.
Who was the gal that you interviewed about owned media a few weeks ago? I forgot her name. Amanda, is it?
Yeah, Amanda. Yeah, Amanda Bagley over at
And I was struck by not only that interview, but Amanda has since reached out, and I've seen her great videos on LinkedIn of like, hey, this is what the week's like. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking, gosh, how powerful is that the company has enabled a rep to talk about, because am I right that she's an AE? Yeah. So talking about the industry from the AE perspective, she doesn't overreach. She's not making stuff up. She's not claiming to know everything in the industry. She knows her I don't station in life. I don't mean that to sound as as it sounds, but she understands what the opportunity is from that perspective, and she's owning it. How cool is that? And so what I would want, and my new company, ANTEATER, focuses on helping CEOs go do the two hard things: know what to say, and then how to get it live in short form content, right? Because what I saw with my executive coaching clients is, I've had probably 400 CEOs I've worked with over the last 7 years, about 100 sales leaders, and about 40 Navy SEALs. There's several things that that are universal.
Why the niche in Navy SEALs?
They found me.
Really?
Yeah. I saw when I was at 500 Startups as an EIR, there was an internal posting that said, we need someone to talk about venture to this group of transitioning Navy guys. I went and discovered that there is a whole, in special forces, you got the guys that are trained much longer than the big Navy or big Army. And what happens is you got somebody with 10 years of training. They missed grad school when we all met at grad school, or they missed some other early 20s experience where we're all finding and connecting and working at the same companies. Or in my case, a lot of 20-year-olds worked at AdRoll, like the guys coming out of the military who came out, went to school, on kind of the standard track 2, 3, 4 years in. They are able to catch up, but folks who took the special forces track actually are several years to go catch up, right? Even if they did grad school as part of what they did within the military. And so what I found was that, there's a universal fear that happens for CEOs and Navy SEALs and sales leaders alike. We all have something we're scared of. Even the people you look up to, there's something they're scared of, right?
Oh, yeah.
You think Michael Jordan's the coolest guy in the world? I know you're not a Chicago sports guy, but you think Michael Jordan's really cool? He's got something he's worried about. He's something scared about. And actually, I was just listening to Oprah's book, What Happened to You. And if you haven't crossed paths with that, you might really be interested in that. It's a book about trauma, but in that book, she's talking about how everybody she interviewed, from presidents to prime ministers all the way through to, local, street workers, they all finish the interview and say, how'd I do? Everybody's seeking approval. Now, Oprah's maybe somebody that everybody seeks approval from. Not me personally, unless you're listening. I'll talk to you. But my point is this: there's a universal fear in this entire client set, from executive coaching and advisory work that I've been doing the last 8 years. And what I'm seeing is somebody saying, what can I say? How do I show up? If the CEO is scared about putting their own message out there, they're going to be real scared about their reps putting messages out there. So how do we get that through that fear, right? The CEO is worried about the next round of funding. And I know you have a lot of CEO friends. Somebody who raises money, everyone else in the building is excited the day that check clears, except for the CEO, who's worried about being written off by the VC. who's worried about getting a call from Doug Landis because he's not growing fast enough. I know Doug's not an MCAP anymore, and we've poked him enough on this show, but they're worried about the VC reaching out and saying, tell me what your target is now that we gave you the money. And I don't think he would disagree with that as much as I shouldn't have brought him into this. But that's what they're worried about. That's what that CEO gets worried about. What is it? Navy SEALs someday get told they can't be Navy SEALs anymore. Now they got to go figure out how to get a job, how to write a resume. I worked with a guy who was doing maritime operations, taking the hardest shots there are to take. And he was like, how'd you get so good at writing resumes? And I told him, that's really simple. I've been trying to convince myself I'm worthy since I started working. And he goes, yeah, me too, in a different way, right? Like he's been trying to earn the trust of teammates. He's been trying to do right for the causes, do right for the nation. And there's something that is on a parallel to that. Even if, your job of like, hey, how do I go get this job, then keep this job?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a universal, I did a podcast a little while ago on the topic of imposter syndrome, right? Because I get it all the time. And I'm like, literally still to this day, no matter how quote unquote big my brand is, I sit at a table with CROs, people, those type of things, $1 million companies. I'm like, Jesus Christ, like this person's fucking way smarter, way whatever. But, within 5-10 minutes of being there, I'm like, okay, like they're all normal people. But that imposter syndrome, what was interesting that made me feel better about it was there's a reason for it, right? Because if you feel imposter syndrome, it's because you reached a level that you haven't been at yet. And so therefore, inherently, once you reach that level, you feel like an imposter because you've never been there before. And then you sit there for a little while. So if you don't feel imposter syndrome, it means you're probably not growing. And I like that reframe because I was like, okay, I could see that, right? Where it's like, hey, I haven't sat at this table yet, so I don't know what this table looks like. So I feel like an imposter, but now I've been at the table a couple of times, I get it. But then the next table I'm sitting at is like, oh shit, okay, this person, you know what I mean? Like, but to your point earlier, it's like, we all face the same problems. We all have the same fears. We all, you know what I mean? We all try to, live the same life, and for the most part. And the empathy, I think, is everybody kind of puts all these other people at a pedestal. Even as a rep, you're looking up at a sea like, oh, I'm sorry to bother you type of bullshit. You got something valuable to say, and you believe in what you sell. I think that's the thing that I've found a lot is that I don't really think a lot of the sales reps that I work with genuinely believe in what they sell. Because it's just it's a software, it's a this, it's a whatever, who cares? And that's the part that I think is the shame, because once you believe, man, it's transferring that enthusiasm, it's being curious, it's all that stuff. But if you don't believe, you're just a fucking shyster sales rep trying to make some cash.
What's tough is so let's talk about, there's two groups here. And I know that your audience is split with a lot of sales reps and a handful of leaders who have to look after this same challenge. What happens as a leader if I don't believe in the product? What happens as a leader when I come out of the product meeting and I know that I wasn't heard by the product leader when I said, this is what our clients want, they blew that off. And now my next meeting, my 3:00, is to try to rally my troops on the sales side, right? They know I don't believe in it, right? They know I'm full of shit. So how do you deal with that? And so one thing that I found, is that the faster I can take a rep through an entire sales cycle with a client, the less it became about me convincing them the product was good. I have to do a little bit of that when I'm selling or recruiting somebody, right? But once that they are joined the team, my speed to value on getting a rep active is having them see the entire sales process. And so what that'll be is mock calls with reps on the team if I don't have active calls. But if you start on a day that there is an SDR book discovery call, or whatever we're calling it now. But if there's an SDR discovery call booked and that's happening on the floor, you're sitting in on that. Or you're listening to an active recording on Course or Gong or whatever tools are happening, right? Because I want you to hear that, and I want you to go, okay, that's it. What's your next meeting? Your next meeting is to hear what that second demo looked like, or whatever stage is. I want you to see the entire thing all the way through. I'm going to record a negotiation call. I'm not going to have you jump in on a Zoom, especially if you're training virtually. I'm not going to throw off the dynamic, but I do want you to hear the thing all the way through. I do want you to feel like you can be, interested and critical of the rep. Well, why'd they say this? Why'd they say that? I do want you to feel like you're engaged because this is your new team, so you can offer a perspective. I think that piece is really cool. If you see the whole thing through, then you also hear somebody say, I want this, I'm buying this, here are my terms. And after you hear that, it's no longer can the VP of sales convince you that this product is the best thing since sliced bread. What's happening is, I just heard for myself, this is a client of this type of company, this is what they bought. But that rep leads with two things. One, a knowledge of what the customer wants. But two, they lead with a deal story. So let's say day 2 is, hey, I'm going to throw you to the wolves, I'm going to make you do a bunch of cold calls. See if you can book me a meeting. That's sort of like dare you to be good at sales. Like, I hope that that's gone. But if it's still around, and let's say that's what you do in day 2, that sales rep tries to go book that meeting, and the guy goes, tell me why I should meet with you. Let's say it's one of your outreach guys that you're working with last week. Tell me why I should meet with you. And the response is, well, don't take my word for it. Just yesterday, I met X, Y, and Z level leader at a company that was this. I'm not at liberty to tell you who that is because it's not my account. But I can tell you, here is the needs. Here's the pain, how they're thinking about pain. Hopefully you're taking a page from Beck around describing pain versus, the problem, right? Like, I'm actually like, here's the pain that caused this problem, and this is the problem they're trying to fix. And they're going to solve that with us. I don't know if you'll solve that with us or not. And frankly, this is my second day of work. But if you want to meet with me, and I'm going to bring a colleague in, and we can talk about X and Y and Z, whatever's on the list. I think that can be a way to get through some of that. Just fake it. Because here's my pet peeve with fake it till you make it.
I don't like fake. I've stopped saying that a long time ago because I don't believe it anymore. But yeah, go for it.
But John, if you fake it till you make it, when you make it, you can't celebrate because you already told everybody you were there.
Yeah, that's true. I like that.
Right?
Yeah,
so even if it's the most superficial thing, I've always wanted to own a Porsche or whatever. I'm not picking on Porsche drivers, but let's say I always wanted to own a Porsche.
Yep.
And I told everybody I had one. I rent one every time I'm in the Bay Area to make it look like I'm a successful consultant. And then finally, someday, the company hits the number. I buy myself my spiff. I go buy myself that cherry red 911 or whatever I've been dreaming about.
Yay.
I can't post and say, look what I've got now.
No.
Because I've been telling you I had it for the last 3 years.
Yep.
And I mean, insert whatever actually, connects and matters to you. But that's why fake it till you make it doesn't work.
How about that from a leadership standpoint? There's this scene in U571 or something like that with Matthew McConaughey where it all goes to shit. He's the second.
Love the McConaughey. Something I watched the other day. You were talking about Green Lights.
Green Lights is the fucking best book I've ever read, personally. Huge fan of him.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. So
no.
Tell me the scene.
Stoner playing bongos, like that's my dream. If I could be him, I'd be fucking psyched. But anyways, has
he been on the show yet?
No, God, I'm trying.
What is he waiting for?
I've reached out to him a few times. He's a hard man to get in touch with, though. I took one of his courses, like his live, like motivational things, because I was trying to find an angle to get him there. But I haven't gotten him yet. He's on the list, though.
I'm sure there's somebody listening who has an idea for you on how to prospect in. This might be the time you can impress John Barrows with your prospecting strategy, or find a way to exchange that lead for some kind of value from JB's. Yes. Anyway, sorry, I derailed you. From a leadership perspective. He was in this movie, and it was actually, I don't know if it was a Navy SEAL, but he was in it, U571 or 547, whatever. It's a submarine, and the captain of the sub dies, right? And Matthew McConaughey is the second in command, and it's all shits and his crew looks at him and he says, they're like, "What do we do?" And he's like, I have no idea. You know what I mean? And in that moment, the crew was basically like, "Fuck," so everybody went all over the place. What level of and let's look at me. Last year, 2023, business fucking fell apart. I thought as transparent as I could be. I was like, this is what's going on. This is what the plan is. And I didn't say, we'll figure, I don't know. I figured we will figure this out. From your perspective though, how much from a leadership standpoint, based on all the, executives you've worked with, what's the line of instilling confidence that I got this as a leader and we will figure this out, when you really are looking at it going, holy shit,
like the world is blowing up around me. And if I tell everybody about this, it's going to be mutiny. People are going to be running away if they really know the truth here, but I don't know what to do. So from your standpoint, where have you seen good leaders lead when they don't know what the fuck is going on or what to do?
It's really easy to see the most dramatic story. The big layoff, the big reduction, everybody home for COVID, your situation. Sorry you had to go through that, but your situation is an example of something we've seen in a lot of startups. I've had to lay people off because the funding round was late. I've also had to hire people that I knew weren't going to be at the company longer than a year, without being able to tell them that. That doesn't feel fucking good. That feels the opposite of good. It is not good. And it sucks. The way I would get through these more dramatic moments is by putting some chips in the bank with the less dramatic moments. So here's an example. When I'm hiring somebody, I like to tell them like, hey, this is my job. This is your job, right? My job is to make sure that your next job is here, because that means you're growing and the company's growing, and that's what I'm going to work towards. And I'm going to try to pay you fairly today with a deal that you're going to grow into it. Think an SDR becoming an AE, right? Here's what I need you to do as an SDR. I don't need you to go get 100 meetings, 1,000 meetings a month. Like, I don't care about that. I need you to be consistent, because consistency is what I'm hiring for in the AE job. When I move you from SDR to AE, I'm going to double your base salary. Most likely. I mean, depends on some mechanics, but let's say that was the deal. And it's like, I'm going to go make that really worth it to you financially. But here are the things that I need to do is I need to keep growing the company. I can't do that with SDR without SDR appointment. That's one little piece of honesty, right? Somebody who asked me in that interview, like, hey, when are you raising the next round? I don't know. That's not my job as a VP of sales. Well, can I meet the CEO and ask them that? Let's back up. What question are you actually asking? How much is our runway? You don't actually, as a young seller, or even as a sales leader, you don't actually need to see the cap table. You think you want that because you read the blog or you listen to My First Million podcast, something like that. And I'm glad that you're interested. There are a bunch of other signals that are way more interesting than the cap table. Date since last funding, super interesting. Most people don't, and you know what? While we're talking about funding, like the easiest hack to that is just go read Venture Deals by Brad Feld. And you know, every company is selling 20% of their company. If they're on the venture route, they're selling 20% of the company per round. And it's about 24 months to 12 months, depending on what the cycle is for fundraising. So call it 18 months. So every 18 months, there's going to be a fundraising round, and you're going to lose 20% of whatever value they offered you in stock. So your question is, can I 4X this business so that my stock is worth it? You don't actually care about how many shares you get, right? But it's hard to think like that. So what I want to do to answer your question of what do you do in those really dramatic times is make those payments early. Here's another one. I learned this one from my old boss, Suresh Khanna, when we were at AdRoll. He did a really good job of framing the commitments we had to each other on the sales team. And he basically wrote down 3 or 4 like core principles on the sales team, and he delivered those, in a meeting. Hey, everybody, this is what it means to be on the sales team. We're growing. I want to go back to this. 3 or 4 times he went back to that. Hey, everybody, we've added a lot of new faces here. Many of you have seen this slide before. I threw in this old gym because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Our goal is to be the best place to work. That means that even though we've got a shitty office, we had a really bad location on Mission Street, we're going to make it really nice inside. We're going to have each other's backs, and this is going to be a great place for you to start your sales career. That was one of the values. Another value was no deal is worth your reputation. And I loved hearing Suresh say that because that really aligned with me personally and made it easier for times when I may not have believed in what we were doing, but I believed in the relationship. And that was easier, right? So as a leader, hearing those things, I was like, okay, I got it. And I got marching orders from the boss, right? Well, check it out. So when things got hard, we had an issue where we had to readjust the comp plan. Things were really hard. So my best sellers lost money, but they were at the top of the stack. And I had to go sit down. Before he announced the change to the comp plan, he put up the same slide. That was the 4th time some of these people had seen that slide, 5th and 6th for some. And it's on there, and he goes, we're going to be the best place to work. That means we have to change comp, so that's true for everybody. or that's true for the most amount of the team. And once we're on that same page, it made it a lot easier to have that conversation. Right. And then there were some things we couldn't be completely transparent about, but there are also some things we could sit people down and say, look, you've been with me 3 years. I need to be honest with you. This is what's happening for you in your comp. And if you're going somewhere else, I'm going to be the first one out there to do your recommendation. If you give me a chance, I think you're going to make it up because here's how it's going to balance out. And the rep that I had to have that conversation with, we are still friends today, and it's going on, 15 years, so so you can do that. So those dramatic moments, and you're talking about some really big ones, but I've never been in a position where you lose the chief when you're driving a sub. That sounds pretty scary, but being honest with people about what scares you and what doesn't scare you in a time that's less dramatic increases that intimacy so that there's trustworthiness.
I love it. And you hit on something also that I think is key is expectation setting. I genuinely believe that life is about expectation setting. I say this all the time where, if you think of the last time you were pissed off about anything, pick it. I don't care what it is. I almost guarantee it's because your expectations were misset. Right?
Time of the flight,
temperature of the room, traffic, 2:00 in the afternoon here in Boston. I figure I'll just pop down the street and, go get some whatever. And I'm jam packed in traffic. I'm like, does anybody fucking work anymore? What the fuck? Right? That type of thing. But if I'm doing it at 7:30 in the morning or 5:30 at night, it's like, yeah, it's traffic. It sucks. So I think a lot of this has to do, especially with funded companies. I do not understand why executives try to hide the fact that they're going for IPO, that they're going for an acquisition, that they're going for, because you can get people to do so much more if they know where they fit and the expectations are clear. Because if I'm just like, hey, look, this is 2 years in and out. The goal is to sell this fucker. So we got to get to this point. But if you come in here, I'm going to align you here and we're all on the same page. And then who knows what's going to happen after 2 years, but that's the goal. I will, and by the way, if you don't want to be on this train, that's okay. Transition out. But this is the way it is. And so few leaders, I think, are willing to set clear expectations, let people know what the direction is, share the vision of what they really want to do, not the bullshit vision that they put up on their fucking whiteboard, but the real one of what they're trying to accomplish. And I think if you do that, that's all people are looking for. It's just, I just need to know where I stand and I need to know where I'm going.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That's something that people are looking for. That's tough because I've never been a venture-backed CEO. So I don't know what it's like to be able to stand up there and say, this is where we're going, this is where we're doing. But I do know that the venture-backed CEOs that I've worked with, when they have an open and honest conversation about their expectations, and they have an open and honest conversation about where they've fallen down, and they have a chance to see the team have their back, it becomes a lot easier to say, hey guys, this is a goal, for them to ask the team. There's one pressure that came up that I never saw as an operator. When I was a sales rep working the company, I never really understood a particular pressure that's on venture-backed CEOs. And I don't know if you've heard this, but there's a stage where that CEO has to show that they can hire an executive from outside the company, where they have to, it's almost bragging rights. I got the VP of marketing from Salesforce. And even though that's true about some companies I work with, I'm not talking about anyone specifically here, just to be clear for anyone listening. But, or I got the head of legal from Twitter or whatever. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. But they have to be able to say that. They have to be able to point to those things. And they have to be able to say, look, I'm building the right team. And some of those moves means that they have to they have to kind of do the fake it till you make it on the recruiting side. I think that there's a better way where you can be honest and do that. But I also haven't been there myself where, I was telling the kids the other day that I almost moved to Boston, John. I don't know if I ever told you this story. I almost moved to Boston with a wife that was 7 months pregnant. I came out there to interview for my first VP of sales job. I knew that I wanted to be the VP of sales from Series A to Series B because I'd seen Suresh do it at AdRoll. And a few months after AdRoll's Series B happened, I was at drinks and dinner with a CEO that I really respected who's from Boston. I thought his market was really interesting. We got into a conversation. And he said, you should come out for an interview. And I got to do the full executive enema interview. I met everybody. I spent time there. Actually, a guy I knew from high school is in He's a town planner for one of the suburbs that's like just north of downtown. I'll get the names wrong. Maybe Brookline, is that a thing?
Yeah, Brookline, yep.
So I think Ethan's from Brookline or nearby. And so he had been a town planner. And so he drove us around. We looked for houses. He taught us about the neighborhoods and told us which infrastructure was the best. And we house shopped. We're moving. We're ready to go. And I didn't get the job. And I got some feedback on why. And one piece of feedback was spot on. And the other piece of feedback was totally made up. I'm sure of it. And later on, I became friends with the person who did get the job. And so I asked them, I was like, hey, and she's like, yeah, I know, but our relationship is outside of that. And I go, okay. And so we're having a drink and we're talking about it. And what I came to realize is that a company where you're not totally sure what the next step is, the right leader is putting a team in place that's ready for that. So the feedback that was accurate, which was my kind of ability to do math, was around P&L and managing the pro forma of what the sales team would need to do. That part was right. I think that CEO was uncertain at how the fundraising was going to go and whether or not I was going to be able to stand the test of that interview process. Mm. The part that was a little bit BS-y was also fair too, because that CEO needed to have enough reason to knock me out of the process because where I was in life was at a place where he didn't want to take the risk, but he didn't want to take the risk in building the company that couldn't support young VP of sales who moves here with a pregnant wife. I don't think that that's discriminatory for anybody who thinks that is. And it's fair if you do and you're like, dude, I would never hold that on him. He's building the company and taking the risk that he feels comfortable with. That was a risk he wasn't comfortable with. I fully support that decision. And my life turned out just fine, even though my expectations led to a little bit of suffering in the short term. And I was a little bit bummed. I could have learned from that situation quicker. But what I did learn was that the right CEOs are standing on a principle. And that is really cool to see that.
And to me, that's where, going through the value exercise, I tell everybody that right now. It's like, if you are wondering where your next job is, what your next challenge, and you're not happy with where you are, forget about looking for the next job, because until you look internally and you look at yourself and you really take a hard look at those true core values of yours, like what do they really mean to you? You're going to keep like going after jobs because they sound sexy or whatever it is. But man, once you match a company, a leader or whatever it is that shares your core values, then the world opens wide up, right?
There's not enough people who are doing the values work. And if you're somebody who's stuck on okay, how do I figure out my values? I would say start with Amy Bolus's scorecard, which I'm sure you've
actually, I haven't seen that one. No, I had my own scorecard. I created my own version of it, but because I went through it.
So deal scorecard.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
I actually go back to a lot of the stuff I learned from you about deal management on the scorecard. The one that looks like a golf scorecard. Yep. You still teaching that one?
Oh, absolutely. Because
I think it's, I love it.
Yep.
I'd love for you to put it out there more so I can point to public resources when it comes up. What I'm talking about is the scorecard of hiring a VP of sales. Mm-hmm. And the scorecard of getting that first VP of sales job. Mm. And so if you haven't had Amy Volas on to talk to her about that,
I absolutely love it.
So make her talk to you about that the next time you have her on, because the idea of running a scorecard for your own hiring process would be one that you guys should compare notes on your scorecards. But what I think is really valuable is the deciding what you would need to take this job. Well, how come when the company, which is going to be, if you venture back, you're going to be a new company every 3 months, even if their job title or your company didn't change, right? There's dynamics that change. There's new people hired. There's new process. There's new systems. There's new resources. There's new resource constrictions. There's new markets. Things move pretty fast. Run that process every 3 months to see if you would take this job if it happened today. What would need to be true for you to thrive in this job, even though your expectations have changed over the last 6 months? Doing that work on a regular basis does two things. One, it increases the level of honesty you have for yourself, and it helps you get a lot of that nonsense out of the way. And you know what? Go ahead and mourn some of that scar tissue of, you were promised a team of 100. Now you can only grow to 20. No offense to anybody that's happened to, but Now you got to decide, are you taking that job today? Are you still going to do it? Did you have any control over pandemic, VC funding, whether or not the company got merged? You don't have any control over these things. So let's take a bet on yourself, or realize that you're not set up to keep betting on yourself and you've run out of chips. Okay, that sucks. But I'm glad you know it now and you've heard it here instead of finding out because someone else told you.
Yeah.
The company you came and trained me, I got to tell you this quick story if you've never heard it. Yeah. And even though I'm going to talk your ear off if you let me.
Sorry, we do have to wrap it up eventually. Yeah.
But when you came out and trained our team, I was at a company where things right after that, the work was good, but the math was wrong. So I'm not asking for a refund on the training. The training was great. The team was doing great. But the overall company's math was off. And meaning the person we were selling to, the ICP, wasn't paying enough to justify the resources that it took to go close the deal. Because we hadn't done the right CPA work, the cost per acquisition work, and we hadn't truly understood what that account meant. And I went to go see, I used to work for a CFO in sales. I was in sales working with a CFO. And so I went to go see him, Peter Krivkovich at AdRoll. And we had a drink and sat down, and I told him what was going on, and there was a pause, a sip, and he goes, sorry, I got to be the one to tell you this, but it's either you or your boss, someone's getting fired. It's probably you. And it's soon. But it's okay. I'm here. I'm going to talk you through what's next. And that was exactly what I needed, bro. Like when Peter sat me down and said, you are going to be fired. These are the things that you need to understand. He helped me understand the business. He started this conversation around business acumen. Made me help me understand the business. He helped me understand the motivations of the leaders at the company, even though he'd never met them before. He had helped me prepare for how to have that conversation to go do something else so that I could leave on my terms. And I moved from a director role to a VP role, partly because of the stuff that Peter helped me understand. And that next job was a go to the boardroom type of job. And that was really cool. It never would have happened without that kind of tough love. You're about to be fired because this math is wrong. Well, how do the rest of us go have the love and faith in each other to be that honest? Right? That's beyond radical candor. That is like the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me, was to say the thing that I least wanted to hear.
It's tough. And I think that's where, that's the part. It's even, you look at your friends, you know what I mean? Where it's like, you got a buddy who, is dating a girl or whatever it is, and she's terrible, but he's all in on her or whatever it is. And it's like, it's wrong.
How about we go, they're terrible for each other?
There you go.
Because their chemical reaction when they're in the room isn't positive
Better
outcome.
way of putting it. Yes, they're terrible for each other, but, blinded.
Because she probably needs to hear it too, let's be honest.
Totally, right? But it's like having that conversation, you risk losing your friend. Because, maybe 5 years down the road, they're going to be like, you know what, dude, you were right, da-da-da. But 5 years from now, so it's really hard to have those conversations with people. I actually, when I worked for Jack Welch for a couple of months, his whole top grading, right? And everybody thinks he's so draconian for that. And I asked him about it. I was like, Jack, everybody just rips you apart for being, he's like, can I just paint the picture here for you? He goes, say you have an average worker who's below, slightly below average or whatever it is, but you're too chicken shit to have the conversation with them. So every year you give them a decent performance review. They think they're doing okay, whatever, right? So they're feeling good about themselves and their job because they got a job, whatever it is. And then layoffs come. And everybody knows layoffs start from the bottom and they move their way up. So all of a sudden you take somebody for 5, 10, 15 years who has been in this job, mediocre at best, and you have been scared to have the real conversation with them that they're not that good at this, but they could be good at something else. And then all of a sudden you come to them and you say, sorry, you're fired. They're going to have an inferiority complex. They're going to be like, wait a minute, I thought I was fucking good at my job. Now
I was doing good.
Now my whole self-worth is all over the place. Whereas instead you come to somebody and say, look, you don't suck in general. You just suck at this. I'm going to cut the cord here so you can go find what you're great at. He's like, which one's worse? Dragging somebody out for an extended period of time and then having them not know what their real self-worth is, or being very honest and very direct with somebody and saying, look, you're not good here. It doesn't mean you suck in general. It just means you suck at this. This is not your path. Go find your path. Like that to me is a far better conversation, but nobody's willing to have it these days.
I got one of those conversations coming at me when I was selling, and the prospect had to have that conversation with me.
Yep.
He just said, "I can tell, Ryan, you're not meant for this." He did it while my colleague was up at the bar getting the next round.
Whoa.
And so we didn't get to finish that conversation.
Yeah.
He and I are still friends.
There you go.
That level of honesty connects us, so if you take nothing else from this conversation, like hopefully it is,
Yep.
trustworthiness is about connection. The connection only comes with taking this risk, whether it's a prospect or a colleague or a friend who needs to hear it.
Yep. Yeah, man. Well, like you said, I think we could keep. I mean, it was funny. I didn't even intro this to, like, usually I'm like, all right, Ryan, what's going on? What's a little background? What's going on? And I was like, fucking thank God I hit record, or else we would have been like, oh shit. So
we would have been talking the whole time.
Awesome,
well,
man.
I'm eager to catch up with you whenever. And, give me a few months and let's do an episode on what we can do around content marketing, because people need to hear it.
Yeah. And I think what you're doing too is like having the story told. Like, I think that's, so many people need to tell their story right now. It's insane. I don't know why more people don't, because it's the easier thing to do is just not how smart you are, but tell your story, just your journey, because you never know when somebody's listening. And I actually put this out to finish this up. I put this out recently where, the reason I do a podcast, the reason I did put social and all these different things is because literally you never know when somebody's listening and it could change their perspective on something. And I had one kid come up to me, and I don't know if I've told the story before, but he said, "Hey, John, can I give you a hug?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'm a hug." So an event, I'm like, I'm a hugger. I'm a hugger. So,
who are you?
Yeah, right. So I give the kid a hug, and he's like, I just want to say thank you. I'm like, for what? He's like, you saved my life. And I'm like, come on, man, save your life. I don't even fucking know you, whatever. He's like, no, John, you don't understand. He's like, remember when you were going through your dad passed away, and you were talking about it, and you were posting about it and sharing like all the struggles. He's like, I listened, and no joke, like I still get teared up thinking about this. The kid, his mom died. His mom died expected, like she had cancer or something like that. So he was expecting that. But on the same day, his brother died, and then his wife left him, and his company fired him for taking too much bereavement, all in 1 month. I'm like, what? And he was literally living in his car and contemplating suicide. And somehow he came across my podcast and was listening to how I was dealing with my grief. And he's like, you know what? I can do this. I can get through this. And he's like, now I got a girlfriend. I'm back on my feet. I got my job. And I was like, I mean, honestly, Ryan, if
you're teaching resilience, if teaching how to find that resilience, if
not a single person ever listens to my podcast again, or I get zero more sponsor dollars for the rest of that fucking this podcast life, it's still worth it 1,000% for that one example, which is why I tell people, tell your fucking story, because you never know, there's somebody behind you or dealing with something that you were dealing with that might look at that and say, ooh, maybe I can get out of this, or whatever it is. So it's almost criminal not to tell your story in a lot of ways. And it's the easiest thing to do because you don't have to make it up.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you again for having me.
Of course, man. It's great catching up with you.
I appreciate you making it happen for so many years.
Love it. Tell people where they can find out more. We will catch up and talk about all the details of what you're doing now, but give a quick synopsis, and then where can people find out more about what you're doing? Yeah.
So I'm on LinkedIn. It's just simple. LinkedIn/J Ryan Williams.
Yep.
And I'm also running a company called ANTEATER. So ANTEATER.media will take you to our website where we're talking with CEOs about how they can tell their story, identify what to say and where to say it, so they can fill revenue pipeline through short form content.
There you go.
And so it's just that simple. And those are places people can find me, and I'm down to connect or share resources however is helpful.
Love it, man. Well, we gotta find a chance to grab a beer and catch up in person one of these days. So,
all right,
my travels.
I look forward to it.
Love it, bro.
All right, brother.
All right, hey everybody, thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And like I say all the time at the end of all these podcasts, go out there and make somebody smile today, because no matter how bad your day is going or you think it went, you go out and make somebody smile. You know you had a good day, and the world needs a lot more of that right now. So thank you all very much, and I will see you on the other side. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. With your support and our incredible guests, we're one of the top sales podcasts out there right now, and I can't thank you enough. Now, to keep the momentum going, it would mean the world to me if you could go and leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform and share some of your favorite episodes with your network. Also, I am super excited to be launching my new newsletter, where I'll be sharing everything I know and everything I'm learning along the way while I'm out there selling every day just like you. Go to jbarrows.com/newsletter to sign up today. Let's all level up and make this happen together.